Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity, exploring ideas that matter. I'm Alex.
And I'm Eve.
And today we are going deep into a book that is both simple and mind-bending.
Yeah.
Finite and Infinite Games by James P. Carse.
Oh, this is a good one.
Have you read this one?
I have.
It's so good.
It's one of those books that feels so timely, even though it was published back in 1986.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
He was tapping into something fundamental about, the human experience.
Absolutely.
It resonates no matter what year it is.
Yeah, and for those unfamiliar with Carse,
Yeah.
he was actually a theologian.
Oh, wow.
But in this book, he steps outside of those traditional religious boundaries and explores life through the lens of game theory.
Okay, so right off the bat, that's intriguing.
Yeah.
Game theory. What's the basic idea here?
Well, Carse's core premise is deceptively simple.
Okay.
He says there are at least two kinds of games.
Okay.
Finite games, which most of us are familiar with,
Right.
have set rules, a clear objective, and a defined winner.
Okay.
Think of a football game, a board game, even an election.
Yeah. Right. Someone wins, someone loses, game over.
Right.
But what's the other kind of game?
Carse calls them infinite games.
Okay.
And these are games where the primary goal isn't to win, but to keep playing. The rules can change, the players might shift, but the point is to continue the game indefinitely.
So it's less about reaching a finish line and more about the journey itself.
Exactly.
Oh.
And Carse argues that many of the most important aspects of life,
Okay.
relationships, personal growth, even culture itself, are best understood as infinite games.
I'm starting to see where this is going.
Yeah.
But let's get into the specifics.
Okay.
The book is broken down into 7 chapters.
Yes.
Right.
And each chapter explores a different facet of this finite and infinite game framework.
Okay.
Chapter 1, titled, "There are at least two kinds of games," really lays the groundwork.
Okay.
Carse dives right into that core distinction, explaining that finite games are played within boundaries, while infinite games are played with boundaries.
Oh, there's already a nuance there that's making me think.
Yeah.
It's not just about the presence or absence of boundaries,
Right.
but how we relate to them.
Precisely. And to illustrate this point,
Okay.
Carse uses a historical example that I found fascinating.
Okay.
General William Tecumseh Sherman.
Oh, interesting. The American Civil War general known for his rather brutal scorched earth tactics.
Yes, him.
Okay.
Carse points out that Sherman viewed war as a finite game,
Okay.
a game to be won at all costs.
Okay.
His goal was to crush the Confederacy and achieve decisive victory.
Which he ultimately did, although with a lot of destruction along the way.
Right, but Carse contrasts this with the perspective of many Native American tribes at that time.
Oh, interesting.
They didn't see war as a finite game with a clear end.
Okay.
For them, it was part of a much larger infinite game of survival and cultural continuity.
So their goal wasn't just to win a single battle,
Right.
but to ensure the ongoing existence of their people and their way of life.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this difference in perspective had a huge impact on their strategies and actions.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Sherman, playing a finite game, was willing to burn and pillage to achieve victory.
Yeah.
The Native Americans playing an infinite game were more focused on adaptability and resilience,
Okay.
even in the face of defeat.
That's such a powerful example.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how this finite versus infinite game dynamic
Yeah.
can play out in so many areas of life.
Absolutely. Carse argues that we're constantly making choices about which game we're playing,
Right.
even if we're not consciously aware of it.
So how do we know which game we're playing? What are some signs?
Well, Carse points out that finite players are often preoccupied with titles, trophies, external validation.
Okay.
They're constantly comparing themselves to others, trying to prove their worth to climb the ladder of success.
Okay, that sounds familiar. Like we all know people like that, maybe even see a bit of ourselves in that description at times.
It's a very common human tendency, but infinite players, on the other hand, are more focused on the process itself. They find joy in the journey and the constant learning and growth. They're not as concerned with winning or losing, but with playing the game to the best of their ability.
So it's about the intrinsic motivation, the love of the game itself, rather than the external rewards.
Exactly. And Carse argues that this shift in perspective can have a profound impact on our experience of life.
Let me ask you this. Can you switch between being a finite and infinite player, depending on the situation? Or is it more of a fundamental mindset shift?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And Carse does acknowledge that we can play different games in different contexts.
Okay.
We might be fiercely competitive in our careers, yet deeply collaborative in our personal relationships.
So it's not about being one type of player all the time,
Right.
but about being aware of the game we're playing in each moment
Yeah.
and making conscious choices about how we want to approach it.
Right, and sometimes shifting our perspective from finite to infinite
Okay.
can open up entirely new possibilities.
Yeah.
Carse writes, to be a finite player is to be bounded by the world. To be an infinite player is to have the world bounded by oneself. It's about recognizing that we have more agency than we often realize.
Okay, I love that quote.
Yeah,
It's empowering.
it is.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
say.
let's get back to the book.
Okay.
What's next after chapter 1?
Well, chapter 2, titled Nobody Can Play a Game by Himself,
Okay.
delves into the social dimension of games.
Okay.
Carse emphasizes that even seemingly solitary games always involve an interplay with others.
Okay.
He uses a beautiful analogy.
Okay.
A river's identity is shaped by its banks.
I love that.
Yeah.
So just like a river needs its banks to define its course,
Right.
we need other people to help shape our sense of self.
Precisely, our identities, our values, our very understanding of the world are formed in relation to others. And Carse goes on to argue that culture itself is an infinite game,
Okay.
a constantly evolving tapestry woven from the threads of individual expression, shared values, and the exchange of ideas.
So rather than trying to impose a fixed set of rules or beliefs, we should be open to the ongoing evolution of culture, to the diversity of perspectives, and the dynamic interplay of ideas.
Exactly. Carse challenges us to consider how we might be unconsciously playing the culture game in a finite way,
Okay.
clinging to rigid rules or outdated beliefs that stifle creativity and progress.
This is making me think about all sorts of things,
Yeah.
from political debates to artistic movements to how we raise our kids.
Yeah.
Are we encouraging them to think for themselves, to challenge the status quo, or are we trying to fit them into a predefined mold?
And those are exactly the kinds of questions
Yeah.
Carse wants us to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
He's not providing easy answers,
Yeah.
but he's giving us a powerful framework for understanding how we interact with the world and with each other.
This is also fascinating.
It is.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground for one section.
Yeah, we have.
Maybe this is a good place to pause for now.
I agree. We've just scratched the surface of what Carse has to offer.
Yeah.
Let's pick up the conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
I love it. Let's do it. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we're exploring the mind-bending world of finite and infinite games.
Picking up where we left off, we were just starting to delve into the idea of culture as an infinite game.
I have to say, that's a concept that's really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much of our energy is often spent trying to win
Right.
in a game that's not even designed to have winners or losers.
Exactly. Carse points out that when we approach culture as a finite game,
Yeah,
we become obsessed with control,
right.
with imposing our own vision of what's right and wrong. We try to force everyone to play by our rules.
And that's where things can get really messy, right?
Yeah.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
You end up with a lot of resistance, and ultimately you're not going to succeed.
Right, because culture, by its very nature, is fluid and ever-changing.
Yeah.
It's a dance, not a dictatorship.
Yeah.
And Carse uses a wonderful metaphor to describe this. He says, to be playful is not to be trivial or frivolous, or to act as though nothing mattered. It is to be free to act toward the world as though it were not yet finished, as though we had a part in creating it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like we're all co-creating the world together
Yes.
through our interactions and expressions.
Exactly. And when we embrace that playful spirit,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to new possibilities, to unexpected connections, to the joy of discovery.
But how does that translate to our individual lives?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to talk about culture in this grand, abstract way.
Yeah.
But what about the day-to-day choices we make?
Well, that's where chapter 3 comes in. It's titled, I Am My Own Genius.
Okay.
And it's perhaps one of the most empowering chapters in the book.
I remember that title really jumping out at me
Yeah.
when I first read the book.
Yeah.
It's a bold statement.
It is. And Carse is very deliberate in his language here.
Okay.
He's not saying we're all geniuses in the traditional sense of
Yeah.
having exceptional intellectual abilities.
So it's not about IQ or test scores.
Not at all. He defines genius as the unique expression of each individual, a process of unfolding and discovery that happens through our interaction with the world.
So it's more about embracing our own unique potential,
Yeah.
our own individual way of being in the world.
Exactly. Carse argues that we all have a genius within us waiting to be discovered.
Okay.
But often we get bogged down by societal expectations, by the rules of success that tell us who we should be and what we should achieve.
Right, those external pressures that can stifle our creativity
Yeah.
and make us feel like we're not good enough.
And Carse urges us to shed those limiting beliefs
Yeah.
and embrace our own unique path. He writes, "There is no how-to to genius. Genius is its own how-to."
It's about trusting the process,
Yes.
allowing ourselves to experiment, to make mistakes,
Yeah,
and to learn from them.
exactly. Carse compares it to a river finding its way to the sea.
Okay.
The river doesn't have a predetermined plan. It simply flows, adapting to the terrain, carving its own path.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's about surrendering to the flow of life, trusting our own intuition, and allowing our genius to emerge organically.
Right. And Carse also emphasizes the importance of playfulness in this process.
Okay.
He says genius is serious play, but play nonetheless.
So it's about approaching life with a sense of curiosity,
Yeah.
with a willingness to experiment and explore.
Exactly. And when we do that, we tap into a deep well of creativity and joy.
Mm.
Carse believes that this playful exploration of our own genius is essential,
Okay.
not only for our own well-being,
Yeah.
but for the well-being of society as a whole.
Because when individuals are free to express their unique gifts,
Yes.
it enriches the cultural landscape and creates a more vibrant and dynamic world.
Precisely. But Carse doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He takes this idea of genius and expands it even further in Chapter 4,
Oh.
titled "The World is History in the Making."
Okay, so now we're getting into some even bigger ideas.
Carse challenges the traditional notion of history as a fixed and immutable record of the past. Instead, he sees history as a continuously unfolding narrative
Okay.
that's being shaped by the choices we make in the present moment.
So it's not just something that happened to us, it's something that we're actively creating.
Exactly. He writes, "There's only a present history. What we call the past is a mode of perception, a way of knowing, a stance we take toward the present, toward ourselves. The past is it's something other than our present. It is part of us, and we are part of it."
That's deep.
Yeah.
It's like the past is always with us, informing our present choices and shaping our future.
Right. And Carse argues that every action, every decision, every interaction we have
Yeah.
contributes to the infinite game of history.
We're all historical actors,
Yeah.
whether we realize it or not.
We are, and that realization can be both empowering and daunting.
Yeah, for sure.
It means that we have a responsibility to act thoughtfully, to consider the consequences of our actions, and to strive to create a future that we can be proud of.
It's like we're all writing our own chapters in the grand book of human history.
And those chapters are constantly being written and rewritten.
Yeah.
Carse uses a powerful metaphor to illustrate the birth of a child.
Okay.
He writes, "The birth of a child is not an event in the history of a family. It is a beginning of history. All that came before is prologue."
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like each new life represents a fresh start, a chance to break free from the patterns of the past and create something new.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we all have the potential to shape the course of history, to leave our mark on the world.
This is all so inspiring, but I think we're getting close to the end of our time for this part.
Yeah.
Should we pause here and pick up the conversation in the next section?
I think that's a great idea. There's still so much more to unpack in Carse's brilliant work.
We'll be back soon for the final part of our deep dive into finite and infinite games. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, listeners. We're in the final stretch of our exploration of finite and infinite games, and I'm feeling like we've only just begun to uncover the layers of this book.
It's true. Each chapter seems to open up new questions and insights that connect to the previous ones in surprising ways.
Absolutely. And speaking of connections, in the last part, we were talking about how history is a constantly unfolding narrative and how we're all active participants in its creation.
Yeah.
That leads us beautifully into Chapter 5, which takes on the relationship between humanity and the natural world.
Yes. Chapter 5, Nature is the Kingdom of the Unaware, introduces a fascinating contrast between human consciousness and the natural world.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Carse argues that nature operates without self-awareness.
Okay.
It's driven by instinct, by the forces of evolution, by an intricate web of interdependencies that exist outside of any conscious intention. Think of a tree growing towards the sun or a bird migrating thousands of miles.
They're not thinking, I should do this or I want to achieve that.
Right.
They're simply responding to their environment, following their innate programming.
Exactly. But humans, on the other hand, have the capacity for self-reflection.
Right.
We can question our motivations, make choices based on values and beliefs, and consciously shape our environment.
It's like we have this extra layer of awareness that sets us apart from the rest of the natural world.
Right, and Carse doesn't frame this as a hierarchy with humans at the top.
Okay.
Instead, he highlights the unique responsibility that comes with our capacity for awareness.
So it's not about seeing ourselves as superior to nature, but as having a unique role to play within it.
Exactly. Carse writes, "To be aware is to be responsible. To be responsible is to be aware the two are inseparable."
It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences not just for ourselves, but for the entire ecosystem.
And this leads us to Chapter 6. We come out of society to control nature, where Carse explores how humans have attempted to exert control over the natural world.
This is where we see the finite game mindset at play.
Yeah.
Right? That desire to dominate, to conquer, to impose our will on the environment.
Exactly. Think about cities, agriculture, technology. These are all ways of trying to bend nature to our will.
And to a certain extent, we've been incredibly successful at that. We've built skyscrapers, engineered crops, even altered the climate.
But Carse cautions us against the hubris of believing we can truly control nature.
Right.
He points out that even in our most sophisticated attempts at mastery, we're ultimately subject to the laws and limitations of the natural world.
It's like trying to hold back the tide.
Hmm.
You might be able to build a wall, but eventually the water will find a way through.
Exactly. And Carse uses a beautiful metaphor to describe this.
Okay.
Flowering.
Hmm.
He suggests that true human flourishing involves not conquering nature, but harmonizing with it.
Okay.
He writes, "To flower is to be at one with the world, to be in the world as the world is in oneself."
It's a shift from a mindset of domination to one of cooperation, of recognizing our interconnectedness with the natural world.
Right. And this brings us to the final chapter, Chapter 7.
Okay.
God plays hide and seek, but never changes his hiding place.
Now, this is where things get a bit more philosophical, right?
Oh.
We're back to Carse's roots as a theologian.
Yes, and this chapter often generates a lot of discussion and interpretation.
I bet.
Because Carse is dealing with some pretty big concepts. God, the divine, the nature of existence.
But even if you're not coming at it from a religious perspective, there's still a lot to unpack here, right?
Absolutely. One way to understand this chapter is through the lens of the infinite game itself.
Okay.
Carse suggests that God, if we can even use that word, is not a finite player with a limited set of strategies.
Okay.
God is the infinite game itself, constantly present, constantly active, yet unchanging in essence.
It's like God is the canvas, and we're the paintbrushes creating this ever-evolving work of art.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and Carse uses the metaphor of hide and seek to describe this relationship. Okay? He says, God plays hide and seek, but never changes his hiding place. It's not about searching for something that's lost or hidden.
Right.
It's about recognizing the divine presence that's always already there in every moment and every experience.
It's a shift from seeking to finding, from striving to being.
Exactly, and Carse suggests that this is the ultimate goal of the infinite game, to awaken to the infinite possibilities that exist within ourselves and in the world around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into finite and infinite games, what's the one key takeaway you would leave our listeners with?
I think it's the power of perspective.
Yeah.
Carse offers us a new way of seeing the world, a way of understanding our place in the grand scheme of things, and that shifting perspective can be incredibly liberating. It can free us from the tyranny of finite games, from the constant pressure to win, to achieve, to accumulate. It allows us to embrace the joy of the journey, the beauty of the present moment, and the infinite possibilities that lie ahead.
Beautifully said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining me on this incredible deep dive. And to all of you listening, would highly recommend picking up Finite and Infinite Games and exploring it for yourselves. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
This is Alex and Eve.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those notes of curiosity flowing.